Marketers, you know that feeling when your content just works? When you crush a viral trend before 10 a.m.? When one tiny tweak to a landing page sends click-through rates through the roof? That's Contentful. Dynamic content made blissfully simple. Contentful helps you create and launch personalized experiences instantly across any digital channel. No stress, no limits, only possibilities. Come get the feels at Contentful.com.
Shopping is hard, right? But I found a better way. Stitch Fix online personal styling makes it easy. I just give my stylist my size, style, and budget preferences. I order boxes when I want and how I want. No subscription required. And he sends just for me pieces, plus outfit recommendations and styling tips. I keep what works and send back the rest. It's so easy. Make style easy. Get started today at stitchfix.com/Spotify. That's stitchfix.com/Spotify.
Leading a business today means constantly adapting. On the Executive Insights podcast brought to you by AWS, global leaders share how they're making tough calls, testing bold ideas, and putting innovation into practice, generative AI included. If you're looking for real stories behind what's working, this is it. Subscribe to the Executive Insights podcast today. Available now on all major podcast platforms.
All episodes of A Trial by Podcast are for informational and entertainment purposes only. Much to their parents' dismay, neither host is a lawyer, journalist, or investigator. Just two people with microphones and Wi-Fi. All actions discussed are alleged, and all parties are innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. For the full legal mumbo-jumbo, check the show notes.
I'm Kelsey.
And I'm Emily.
And this is A Trial by Podcast. So welcome back to the pod, everybody. Emily is here with us alive, but very unwell. Emily, would you like to tell them why you're so unwell?
Just a little bit too much to drink last night, but...
And maybe this morning when I woke up on her couch at 6 o'clock in the morning and Emily was still up out on the deck.
It do be like that sometimes.
It do be like that sometimes. And so Emily was very high energy last time.
I'm going to do my best to bring the same energy.
If I know one thing about Emily, it's that she can rally. And actually, that's such a false statement, respectfully. But I feel like today you're going to.
I'm going to need to? Okay.
Yeah, you're going to, because the story is going to enrage you and just perplex you, and you're going to get riled up over it.
Okay. I am excited about this story. I've been thinking about it. It's been my Roman Empire for the past 2 days.
Yeah, yeah. We actually paused in between recording parts 1 and 2 this time, so Emily's been waiting for this. And I did accidentally break some details to her last night that she was mad at me for, but I don't think you remember.
I don't remember.
I had a feeling. I had a feeling.
Love that.
Okay, so if you guys have been listening to the pod and you're enjoying, if you could just make sure that you're following us wherever you're listening and give us a 5-star rating, that would be great. If this is your first time listening, you should probably go back to part 1. But with that, let's get right into it. Wait, one more thing, just real quick. I wanted to mention I was lucky enough to go on a podcast called Smile Talk with Jacob, and it's all about, like entrepreneurship and building confidence and all of these things. So I feel like a total phony being on this podcast, but basically we connected through a friend, and I felt like I never hear people talk about what it was like starting a podcast and all of these things. So we had a great conversation about running a small business, starting a podcast, finding what you want to do, all of these sorts of things. I cringe personally when I listen to it just because it's me, but I'm so grateful that he had me come on. So I would love to support his podcast. It is a video podcast, so it's only available on YouTube right now. So I'll link it in the show notes if you guys want to check that out. But now let's actually get to the story, what you guys are here for, because who wants to hear me talk about podcasts on podcasts in podcasts during a podcast for an hour? So last week, I just want to review some of the characters and kind of what we talked about just so everybody's following. So Robert Wone is obviously the victim in this story, and he was staying at the townhouse of one of his friends from college, Joseph Price, who's also an attorney. Joseph Price's main spouse was Victor Zaborsky. He's the one that called 911. Joe's kind of like the leader of the household. He seems to be like the dominant personality in the household and in the relationship dynamic. Then there's also a third man that lives with them, Dylan Ward, who is kind of, he's in the relationship, but not as much as Victor and Joseph are. He's kind of like the third wheel, but they did say that the goal was for him to be like an equal part eventually. So that was something that they were working on. Now, we went over near the end of last week's episode, we talked about some of the crime scene. There seemed to be evidence that pointed to some of this crime scene being staged. The knife didn't really match the wounds, even though it had blood on it. The towel, it didn't look like it had been pressed into a wound. It looked like maybe it was used to wipe that blood on the knife. So very interesting. There was also some evidence of an actual cleanup. So they used cadaver dogs to sniff out blood. And this dog alerted to the scent of blood in two locations, which were odd. The lint filter of the dryer, and then also a drain in the backyard patio. So this is interesting. Why would there be blood in these things? Was there maybe some cleanup done here? But remember, our timeline is very tight. They call 911 79 minutes after Robert arrives at the house. So this is a very tight timeline, and it's so confusing because it seems like there's this crazy cleanup done, and we're going to get some more evidence of why it seems like that. But also, it seems impossible to do all of that within this time period. Think about it. If they put stuff in the washer and then the dryer, like, I don't know about your guys.
I mean, a full cycle is like over an hour.
Yeah, like that's crazy. So you know, could it be, it could just be, it could have been blood, but maybe it was unrelated. We don't know. And there, you know, we never will know. There's no way to know. Yeah. But it's just really, really interesting. We also talked a lot last week about the unusual behavior. Like the men seemed oddly calm, according to some of the investigators and the paramedics on the scene. They just felt like their stories were too consistent. They felt like they were acting weird. They seemed like they were freshly showered. And it just really, you know, again, this is all opinion based. This is not fact that these men did anything wrong, but according to investigators and the paramedics on the scene, they just had that gut instinct that something seemed off with these guys. It was not normal. So where we kind of left off last week is we're going to start going into this autopsy, all of the autopsy findings. And we talked about the stab wounds last week. So the stab wounds, again, they didn't match that knife that was found next to Robert, and they seemed a little bit too shallow for that knife. You would have expected them to be deeper in any other normal stabbing. Now, one of these stab wounds pierced his heart, another pierced his right lung, and a third was cut into his abdomen. So any of these could have been a fatal wound. They don't know which one is the one that, you know, ended his life. They were all fatal wounds. And what was so weird about them, in addition to like the depth, is that they were almost surgical in their precision. The edges were smooth and parallel, and none of the wounds showed like ragged or defensive patterns that would occur if the victim was moving or twisting in any way. So it almost seems like he had to have been perfectly still while these stab wounds were being made.
Yeah, and they were doing them like slowly. You know?
Yes, yeah, that's what it seems like. And they also talk about how each of these stab wounds is almost identical to each other. They're going in at the exact same angle. So if you're stabbing someone, they're going to be flinching, you would imagine. If they can move, if they're conscious, they're going to be flinching. They're going to be, you know, trying to defend themselves. There's no defensive wounds. There's just the stab wounds. And the stab wounds are, it looks like he must have been laying perfectly still. That is what is so weird about these wounds. Because guess what? Even if someone was like voluntarily getting, there's no way that they could just lay perfectly still if they were conscious and they could move and they knew and could feel what was going on.
Yeah.
So this tells us that Robert was probably not conscious while this happened or could not move. And we're going to get into more theories on that in just a second. But like I said, this is highly unusual in stabbing homicides. And it really suggests that Robert was incapacitated, maybe unconscious or paralyzed at the time that he was stabbed and thus unable to defend himself. The medical examiner also noted subtle signs consistent with a possible smothering or asphyxiation attempt prior to death. So he had petechial hemorrhages in his eyes, which are basically like burst capillaries. And this is something that we see often when people are strangled to death, because really what it can indicate is either oxygen deprivation or just extreme stress in the moments before death. So this alone doesn't prove that he was strangled, but it is one of the things that we see often with strangulation. You know what I mean?
Okay. I mean, that makes sense to me. Because, how else would the fucking stab... But the autopsy person,
medical examiner?
Yep. They said that he was, the stabs were what killed him?
Yes. Yeah,
okay.
The stabs were what killed him. According to the autopsy, that was the cause of death. The weird thing about this, though, is, there's not a ton of bruising on his neck or anything that you would expect to see with strangulation. Mm-hmm. So it's possible that this was choking, but not to the point where you're strangling someone to death for minutes. You know what I mean?
Okay, yeah.
So that's interesting with what we're going to talk about. Just keep that in mind.
Okay.
Now, this all combined with the fact that Robert likely remained alive for at least a minute or more after the first stab wound. And we know that because there's blood in his lungs. So that means he was breathing when those stab wounds were made, or when at least one of those stab wounds was made, because he inhaled some of the blood into his lungs. So this combined with the lack of struggle, it's all adding up to just shit that it doesn't make any sense. It's puzzling, because if he's conscious and able, he should have reacted or fought back in that window of time. But we can tell from the stab wounds that he didn't. So the question is, was he drugged? And unfortunately, the short answer is we don't know. Now, the autopsy did find that there were a series of needle puncture marks on Robert's body. They were on his neck, his chest, his foot, his ankle, his hand, and his forearm. They all had tiny punctures consistent with needle entry. Now, investigators did confirm with EMTs and hospital staff that their medical interventions would not account for all of these. So they accounted for some of this because they tried to save his life. They took him to the hospital. They were trying to save his life, but not all of them. They said there's no way. Though it doesn't sound like they could say exactly which ones were accounted for, or they didn't know all of the ones that, I don't know that they keep a full-on record of that.
Okay.
Now, I could be wrong about that. Maybe it is accounted for, but I couldn't find that information because I was curious. But they also say that, emergency medical personnel, they might insert an IV line or inject medications in certain standard locations like the arm or the hand. But for a young man like Robert, they usually shouldn't have to put needles in places like the ankle or the neck. That would be highly unusual. And in that case, you would think, okay, these paramedics would remember doing that.
Yeah, they
you know
would
what I mean?
It, yeah.
So this raises the possibility that maybe Robert had been drugged, and police theorize that maybe it was some sort of fast-acting paralytic or sedative, something like ketamine or a paralytic anesthetic. But they think maybe one of these could have been injected to immobilize Robert. So basically he is paralyzed, rendering him unable to move or cry out prior to the stabbing. So the initial arrest affidavit actually stated that Robert was, quote, restrained, incapacitated, and murdered, end quote, implying a chemical incapacitation. So
that's an awful lot of work for somebody that just accidentally stumbled upon somebody to just rob the house.
Exactly. And again, toxicology tests on his blood did not detect any common drugs or toxins. There was no roofies, GHB, date rape drugs. There was nothing in the toxicology. Okay. However, it's unclear whether or not they tested for ketamine. And we're also going to talk about a little bit about a drug called succinylcholine. And that would not be on a normal toxicology panel that you would do during an autopsy. So the whole thing is, I just want to make it clear, this is the prosecutor's theory eventually when we're going to get to a trial. What they're theorizing is that he was restrained, he was incapacitated, and murdered. And we can't prove 100% for certain that he was drugged from, what I've been able to find. So I just want to make that very clear. But like I said, they didn't detect any common drugs or toxins in his toxicology report. But the absence of detected drugs doesn't definitively rule out sedation. It remains a strong possibility given the totality of the evidence. These stab wounds, they think, could not have happened if he was conscious or not paralyzed. He had to be unconscious or paralyzed.
Yeah.
Or both, But they're like this. There is no way a conscious person who is able to move, there's no way these stab wounds could have made. They couldn't have done that to themselves with that much precision.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting. I've never heard of anything like that.
Yeah, that's kind of wild.
So one of the leading theories from online speculators is that succinylcholine may have been used. Now, if anyone is a Forensic Files fan, I used to be so deep into Forensic Files. I remember when I was in college and I was in a deep, deep, dark depression, I literally would just stay in my room. And on HLN Network, Forensic Files is on 24 fucking hours a day. I can't even tell you the way Keith Morrison's like voice is in my head at all times. And there's a bunch of like memes and stuff out there about how he goes, successional choline. Like, I can't even do it. But if you watch Forensic Files, you know what successional choline is.
Is it like a common thing?
Well, it's common. It's used in like hospitals and stuff like that. It's like it's a medication. Okay. So basically, it's a powerful and fast-acting neuromuscular blocker that induces temporary paralysis without affecting consciousness. Meaning, when used, the person is fully paralyzed but completely conscious. They're able to think normally, feel pain normally, but unable to move. Which is the most fucking terrifying thing that I've ever heard in my goddamn life.
Yeah.
Now, when it's used in hospitals, it's used in conjunction with other medications to, make you unconscious. I don't know exactly if it's used during surgeries or exactly what it's used for, but I think it's because, any medical professionals tell me if I'm misunderstanding this, but I believe it's because even if you're unconscious, your body will physically react to stuff. It's like when they do the little knee test with the little hammer thingy-mabobber, and like your body's just gonna, like, you have reflexes. Yeah. And so I think that's what successional choline is used for, is to stop those reflexes. But they don't just use that alone and then just like cut you open, because you'd feel everything and you'd be awake. You know what I mean? So
in theory, he could have been awake the entire time this was happening to him, but just paralyzed?
In theory, he could have been, but we don't know. There again, this is just online speculation from people. There is no evidence that successional choline was used, but if it was, it would make sense that it would be injected. Yeah. So super interesting.
Where do you even get that from?
Well, we're going to talk a little bit about where maybe this came from. Now, a general dosage apparently lasts about 5 to 10 minutes, and it breaks down so quickly that it often evades standard toxicology screenings, making it notoriously hard to detect. Plus, while the toxicology was negative, specialized tests for paralytics like successional choline, they weren't ever conducted, because when they were first doing all the toxicology and the autopsy, there wasn't reason for them to think that was needed. Now, these facts, combined with the rapid onset of successional choline and its fleeting detection window, they fueled this theory online that he was drugged and paralyzed before being stabbed, explaining why he couldn't fight back or call for help. And in my opinion, I believe this portion of the theory, whether it was successional choline or not. Yeah, I do believe that he was drugged by someone. Yeah. And this goes back to Emily's question. Comment. That's a really crazy thing for an intruder to do. If they're just trying to they're going to come in, drug you. And that just shows you, like, robbery was never the motive here. Nothing was taken.
No, Robert was the motive.
Robert was the motive. And yeah. Now, the autopsy and subsequent forensic analyses also uncovered signs of possible sexual assault, adding another troubling layer to the case. There was mild trauma suggestive of either anal sexual contact or the insertion of an object. And this detail was noted in early reports, though exact specifics were not publicly released. So we don't have all the details on exactly what that means. More definitively, swabs and tests revealed the presence of semen on his genital area, his inner thighs, and inside of his rectum. Okay? So sounds like confirmation of sexual assault, right? You're like, okay, well, sounds like someone.
What else do you do? Yeah.
A man sexually assaulted him, right?
Right.
Well, here's the thing. DNA testing was done on all of the different samples. So from his genital area, from his inner thighs, and from his rectum. And it was confirmed that all of this semen belonged to Robert. It was his own semen. What? I told you, this autopsy evidence is some of the most confusing autopsy evidence I've ever heard. Because how does, I think we can all speculate on how that could get there. You could argue, for his genital area and his inner thighs, maybe this was something he was doing alone.
Yeah.
But inside of his rectum would be
a little hard.
Yeah. I mean, you would need something to do that.
Yeah.
You would need some sort of tool to do that. I feel like, I don't know.
Right. But I am so confused how that would happen.
Let's keep going, because I think there are some good theories on how this got there. But again, just like crazy. So here's the other thing is, not only the semen evidence, but like no other DNA from any other individual was found. So like there's no saliva found from any other man or anything like that. It's just showing from Robert. Now, this is obviously highly atypical in a death scene and suggests that Robert may have been sexually stimulated or violated around the time of his death. And importantly, none of the 3 housemates admitted to any sexual contact with Robert. Like they say, you know, they're like, well, was there a consensual thing? Because remember, these homophobic detectives that are, why would a straight man say this homosexual is just like a piece of shit? But all 3 of the men in the house maintained that Robert was heterosexual and he was not involved with any of them sexually or romantically in any way, shape, or form ever before this night or during this night. Okay. The semen evidence, though, coupled with the needle marks and the lack of a struggle, strongly supported investigators' suspicion that Robert had been chemically immobilized and then sexually assaulted before the stabbing. And again, you ask, well, why is it his semen then? And how is it his semen if he was drugged before this?
Because
there are interesting answers to this.
Okay.
Don't worry.
I can't even talk. I don't even know.
I know. Now, just a note on this too, like this reminds me, this is such a prime example of something I think we've talked about a handful of times before. And I know we talked about it during Alice and Botha. Like if he was chemically immobilized, paralyzed or unconscious and sexually assaulted, and there is his semen is present, then that really is just a prime example of the fact that a human body responding to stimulus is not consent. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, you can't get a more like grade A example of that. Like if he was paralyzed, his body was still able to do that. And so, you know, we talk a lot about this with like sexual assault victims. You know, sometimes their body responds to stimulus the way you would respond to tickling. You don't want to be tickled, but you're laughing because that's your body's reaction. Mm-hmm. So I just always like to point that out because I think it's such an important fact.
This podcast is brought to you by Carvana. Got a car to sell, but no time to waste? Hop on to Carvana.com to get a real offer for your car in seconds. All you have to do is enter your license plate, answer a few quick questions, and if you accept the offer, Carvana will pay you as soon as you hand the keys over. They even offer same-day pickup in many cities. Save your time, score some cash, and sell your car the convenient way to
Carvana.
Pickup times vary. Fees may apply.
Hi, welcome to IKEA.
This is my college campus.
Correct, but I see you're on IKEA.com ordering some college items.
My daughter's room is pretty bare. We need a lamp, some comfy pillows, her favorite stuffy.
Dad!
With pickup options, we've got what you need to conveniently order IKEA. Literally anywhere.
Sweet. More time for gaming.
And studying. Wait, where are you going now?
Got to show the ultimate Frisbee team how easy it is to order from IKEA. Get IKEA whenever, wherever, however you want. Choose from thousands of pickup locations, affordable delivery options, and more.
But initially, prosecutors believed that Robert had been subjected to some form of sexual violence, like, you know, maybe he was raped or just some form of sexual assault while he was incapacitated. However, it should be noted that later in the legal proceedings, the government scaled back explicit claims of sexual assault due to evidentiary challenges, even as the unexplained semen and injuries remained a key part of the case's mystery. So when they do take this to trial, they don't really harp on the fact that maybe he was sexually assaulted, because I think it's something that, because it's Robert's semen, it's more easily refuted by the defense. I'm not sure. But here's the thing is, like, you kind of think that, remember last week I was like, oh, there's going to be some what the fuck moments.
Yeah.
You think that was it, right? Are you ready for another what the fuck moment?
How many are there?
These are the two biggest what the fuck moments.
Okay.
On top of this extremely confusing semen evidence, the medical examiner noted that Robert was also missing a lot of his blood. And the small amount of blood at the crime scene could not have been all of it.
Yeah, no way.
In fact, according to the prosecutors, the medical examiner noted that the blood still in Robert's body, plus the blood from the crime scene, only accounted for a little less than 2/3 of what his blood volume should have been, like the average blood volume for someone his size.
So he lost over 1/3 of his blood in his body, and it was just like a little pile on the bed and on the towel?
Likely, but we don't. There are some people speculate that the medical examiner or whoever was doing the blood volume just messed this up, because there really is no good explanation for where this blood went.
Yeah.
Because think about it, even if this was staged and you're trying to make it look like an intruder, why would you get rid of all of the blood then? You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's so weird.
And also remember this tight time frame. You know, this all goes down in about an hour and 20 minutes.
That's what's wild to me. Like, this could not have been just...
Right. Like, if they had a full day, this could all make sense. I feel like you could explain the blood and like what, you know, this was like very... aggressively staged.
I was gonna say it's so thought out. Like, that's crazy.
And
that
they
it could have been.
They wouldn't have had the time if these men were involved, because we do not know. They would not have had the time to effectively clean that up within an hour and 20 minutes. And that's like if Robert was killed the moment he stepped into that house.
So could one of the puncture wounds be from draining his blood or something? Like, maybe they took
that's a
his
really
blood?
interesting thought.
Because then that would explain
But
why
where would
he
they
wouldn't
put
bleed
it?
as much. I have no idea. Maybe down the drain in the backyard?
I guess. Yeah. I mean, I don't
why?
know.
Like, that's a lot of work. I don't know.
I know. And that's why, honestly, there are some theories that maybe Robert was killed elsewhere and he was moved into the bed as part of staging the scene.
Still, where's the rest of the blood? Like, there would still be... Where else could he have been killed?
I don't know. I don't know. Well, no. Okay, so one of the theories is that, like, I guess they had a kiddie pool because... Listen to this. I forgot to mention this part.
They have a dog.
No, So Victor and Joseph had artificially inseminated 2 women.
Oh.
Like a lesbian couple.
Yeah.
And they were like co-parenting the kids with this lesbian couple who I think were like the main parents.
Dude.
But like the kids would come over to see. And I don't know that much about, because to be honest, it's like their kids. Like I want to leave them the fuck alone.
Yeah. This relationship dynamic though is like so many turns.
Yeah. But they said that they had like this kiddie pool at one point. Like people report seeing this kiddie pool, but they were like investigators were never able to like find it. And so some people say, was he killed in the kiddie pool? And that's where, you know, that's easy cleanup. But it's like, how did they dispose of that? And investigators did search all of the trash cans and everything like all down the street that night. And they didn't find any like discarded evidence or anything like that. So I think the kiddie pool theory is like very unlikely. Like, how would they get rid of? That's a big thing to get rid of.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's something people say. Now, the general consensus from most people like I hear talk about this case is that the missing blood seems to be like a massive red herring in this story. And it's possible that it was just that the blood volume was miscalculated. They say, you know, because he was stabbed, there is some internal bleeding. It's not super easy to account for all of that. And it's not ever like an exact science, like down to the last fluid ounce.
Yeah.
So they say it's possible that it's miscalculated. And I have no fucking idea, guys. I have no idea. I don't think they had the time to get rid of all this blood, but I don't know. And I don't see why they would.
Yeah. If they're trying to say,
hiding
it was
the stab.
robbed.
Yeah.
We were robbed.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, you would want all the blood at the scene, you know? You would want, but I don't know. So what the fuck happened here?
Yeah, what the fuck is going on?
Right? So there are a few leading theories. Let's start with the theory that is given to us by Price, Zaborsky, and Ward. And I feel like we kind of already know the basics of this, but we're going to run through it in a little bit of detail just so you guys can really understand the theory that they eventually kind of put together. So the 3 men have consistently maintained that an unknown intruder broke into their home and killed Robert. In their scenario, this assailant somehow entered through the back door, possibly left unlocked by Price, who again, he said he went to shoo away a bug that he saw outside, and then he forgot to lock the door and set the alarm again after he came back in. I don't know. So they say that this back door was probably unlocked because of this, and the intruder came in through the back door after hopping that 8-foot fence, grabbed a kitchen knife, and attacked Robert in the guest room, all while the other 3 residents were asleep on 2 different floors. And remember, once he goes up that staircase to the 2nd floor where Robert was sleeping, that staircase leads directly to Dylan Ward's room.
Right.
He then would have had to like do kind of a 180 down the hallway next to the staircase and go back to Robert, skipping over Dylan Ward entirely, which... Again,
Unlikely.
It just seems odd.
Weird.
It
Yeah.
just seems odd. Now, they suggested that the intruder's motive may have been burglary or some random violence, like just some crazed person that's like, I'm going to kill somebody today. I don't know. Though, notably, nothing was stolen. Robert's 2 wallets because he's a genius. Neither were stolen. And
I forgot about the 2 wallets.
yeah, like the dummy wallet that he carries is so smart. Now, from the start, investigators and eventually the trial judge found this theory to be highly implausible. An intruder would have needed extraordinary luck and stealth, scaling a tall fence, slipping past an alarm chime, choosing the one occupied room, bypassing the closer room where Ward slept, and subduing Robert, which Robert was in his 30s. He was fit. He was trained in martial arts, I guess. That's what I read. I don't know what kind of martial arts. Yet he never fought back. He never fought this intruder back. It's just none of it makes sense.
Yeah, weird.
And not only did they do all of this, but they did it without waking anyone. And then they cleaned up and moved shit around and then just like vanished all within an hour. And not even, actually, I wrote all within an hour's time. But even less than that,
I was going to
because
say, I think it was less than an hour.
they said that they went up to bed right around 11 o'clock. And the police were called at 11:49. So, yeah, it's just to me, in my personal opinion, it's kind of fucking unbelievable.
Yeah, very.
Now, police conducted neighborhood canvasses and they never found evidence of any sort of prowler. No one saw anyone. And you imagine if this guy just killed somebody, then he hears the other people waking up and he runs out of the house.
He's going to be causing some ruckus pop.
You would imagine he's running.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe he's so stealthy and smooth that he just walks away from the scene casually. But no one reports seeing anything weird that night. Nothing outside. So while it's not impossible that an outsider committed the murder, authorities eventually ruled out known alternative suspects. For instance, they had a tenant in the basement apartment. That person was away that night. And they also talk about one alternative suspect. And this suspect, I don't want to call him suspect, sorry, person of interest. This was a person of interest that police, I think, validly were looking into. Mm-hmm. This one gets a lot of online speculation. I don't know how I feel about it, but that is Joseph Price's brother. I don't really want to spend too much time on this because I personally don't really think he had anything to do with this, but there are enough questions about his possible involvement that I think it's worth spending just a few minutes on. So, months after the murder, they're still living in this house and everything. Months later, Joseph Price's brother broke into the Swan Street house and burglarized it. He stole a TV, he stole some cash, some valuables, etc. And this led to online speculation that maybe Price's brother was the intruder who murdered Robert. He had come in to steal stuff. Again, it's well, then why would he do it while they were home? You would imagine he would know their routines.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
If this was a burglary gone wrong. I don't know.
But also, why target Robert? Why?
Right. If you know that that's just the guest room and you know this house, that's because people say, okay, he knows their house, he knows the layout, he knows their security system, he knows if they have cameras, all of that. But why would, unless they kept all their valuables in that guest room, which doesn't really make sense to me. I don't know, why would that be your first stop? Just seems odd. And Robert was found in the bed, so it doesn't seem like Robert woke up and found someone burglarizing the home. And then he's like, oh, I have to kill him. So
I still can't get over that there's too much. I don't know. My brain is bouncing.
I know.
Because it's first it was the door chime, whatever. They forgot to lock the back door because of stupid bug. Then it was the stab wounds and the unconsciousness thing is weird as fuck.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't explain that either.
Yeah, nothing. There's no good theory to me that explains every single thing in this case.
No,
it's so wild. And to me, this thing about the brother, I don't think that he killed Robert. I truly do not. There's no evidence to suggest that he was in or around the home that day, nor that he had any connection with Robert. So it's not even he went in there to kill Robert knowing Robert was going to be there or something. Because that's, that's a possibility. But no one says, oh, yeah, he knew Robert or him and Robert had beef or anything like that.
Why?
Robert doesn't sound like the type of person to me that had beef with anybody.
Literally.
Just seemed like the nicest, sweetest, most altruistic man ever to live.
He sounds like a very unconfrontational person, hence the 2 wallets.
Yeah, exactly.
Here, just take this one.
Exactly. So what is the motive for this guy to kill Robert? And I don't know. Again, it's like he robbed the house months later, which bad move. Like when someone was just murdered in the house and you know that the theory is that it was an intruder, like don't go then intrude that house. Of course, then you're going to be pointed at, sir.
Yeah.
And I don't know, to be honest, like if he was convicted of any of that. This is stated as fact online from all the sources that I read, because it's mentioned in every piece of coverage of this case. So I assume he is, but I just wanted to throw that little disclaimer out there in case that's not the case. Now, there's also a second theory when it comes to the brother. So let's say maybe he didn't kill Robert. Maybe he was not there that night, but maybe he was involved. And this theory is a little bit more believable to me. And basically what it is that at the time of Robert's murder, the brother was enrolled in a phlebotomy course at Montgomery College, meaning he was learning how to draw blood. And internet armchair detectives like to speculate that because he worked in a medical setting, maybe he had stolen some sort of paralytic like succinylcholine or a drug like ketamine and either used it to subdue Robert himself or gave it or sold it to his brother, who then used it to subdue Robert.
But that would also explain if he was like drained of his blood, you know, like if they took blood from him.
But why would they drain him of his blood?
I don't know.
I don't know.
Like,
I don't think they did.
Where's all the blood is where did it go?
I think that's why I think there's no even like, no one has like a good theory on it that's even like somewhat makes sense to me, in my opinion. I think that it may have been just miscalculated, but I don't know. Like, you know, let us know what you guys think.
I mean, there wasn't even a lot of blood at the crime scene. That's what I'm saying. Like, where did that go?
That's true.
If he was stabbed, like, where the fuck is all that?
I mean,
blood?
internal, I don't know. I really don't, to be honest. I don't know where it could have gone. It is weird. The crime scene is so weird. The autopsy findings are so...
Yeah.
This whole story is just so weird. Like, it's so perplexing. I keep using that same word over and over. I need, like, a thesaurus, but that's the only one I can come up with. Now, here's the thing about the brother, though. They say, okay, he was working at, you know, he was in a medical setting, blah, blah, blah. The only thing is like, this is a good theory at the surface level, but when you dig deeper, there's a lot of question marks. At the surface level, this is a good theory because it does answer one huge question mark, which is if Price, Zaborsky, and Ward were involved with Robert's death, and this was indeed like a drugging and a sexual assault, where did they get the drugs? Because none of them worked in a medical setting. None of them, you know, there were no drugs found in the house. None of them, you know, took any medications that could have been used. Not that I can find, at least. You know, I haven't found any information on that. So where would they get these? Okay, so the brother seems like it answers that question, right? But when you dig deeper into this theory, there's a lot of holes in it because even though he was enrolled in this phlebotomy course, like there's no evidence that he ever worked in a hospital or medical facility at all. None
so
that I
he
could
wouldn't
find.
just have open access to that
Yeah,
stuff.
like, so he's in this phlebotomy course. Maybe he could have gotten needles and stuff, but they don't have succinylcholine in, you know, at the phlebotomy course, like where you're learning how to draw blood. You know what I mean? Yeah. So again, it's one of those things. Is it possible that the brother supplied some sort of drug? Yes. Do I think there's evidence that makes that seem more likely than anyone else that they could have gotten it from? No, not really. Not in my opinion. Like, and I think, you know, there are drug dealers out there who sell these sorts of things. Now,
it's crazy to hit up a drug dealer. Hey, can I just get some succinylcholine?
Dude, drug dealers be selling like roofies and stuff. Guys, if you guys do drugs, first of all, don't. Second of all, if you do them safely. Third of all, don't. But also, if you do like, and you're buying drugs from someone, you should be asking what they're all selling, because you might be buying weed or something from someone who also sells roofies. Okay. And we don't want to put money in the pocket of someone who sells roofies, because guess what? They're not selling roofies to good people, most likely. Unless someone's just roofing themselves. I don't know. Now, so we've talked about the theory that the three men, this intruder theory, we've talked a lot about why it doesn't make sense. Let's talk about the dominant theory among law enforcement. And that is that one or more of the housemates was directly responsible for Robert's murder and the others helped cover it up. Allegedly, okay? Want to make this clear? We're theorizing here. This is speculation. This is conjecture. This is all based off what the investigators believe and the prosecution in one of the eventual trials believe may have happened, but this is all allegedly. Now, while investigators have never been able to specify exactly who did what, the working theory at trial was that all three men acted in concert after the fact to stage the scene and mislead police on purpose. So many observers, including the prosecutors, believed that Price and Ward were the primary actors in whatever happened. They don't really have a good theory on which one did the actual stabbing, but they think that Price and Ward were the ones that were involved in this.
I'd have to agree.
They think that Zaborsky, perhaps less involved, but like they think Victor found out what they did and helped them cover it up, but they don't believe that Victor was involved in if there was a sexual assault, if they were the murderers or one of them was the murderer. They don't believe that Victor Zaborsky was involved in that piece of it. Okay. They think he was after the fact covering it up, allegedly. So basically, this theory posits that Robert, upon arriving at his friend's home, was unexpectedly victimized by a sexual assault that was planned or initiated by Price and Ward, who had a well-known interest in BDSM and may have seen an opportunity when their trusting friend stayed over.
That is so fucked up.
So we've talked a little bit about the dynamics between these three men. We know Joseph Price is kind of like the dominant leader in this household. Victor Zaborsky seems to be a little bit more emotional, a little bit more like of a follower, like looking to Joseph Price of like, you know, guide me.
So like in BDSM terms, Joseph Price was the dominant, Victor Zaborsky was the submissive.
Well, this is where it gets interesting, Emily. So it doesn't seem that Victor Zaborsky was involved in the BDSM relationship, or at least nowhere near to the extent that Joseph Price and Dylan Ward were involved in a BDSM relationship. And here's where it gets flip-flopped, because Joseph Price we see as the dominant personality in this household. Yeah. He's kind of the one doing all of the talking during that first questioning at the house with the police. He seems to kind of be guiding Victor while he's on the phone, allegedly. And so you would think this BDSM relationship, he's going to be the dominant one. But it was the opposite. Dylan Ward was the dominant in their BDSM relationship, and Joseph Price was the submissive. So that kind of like flip-flops this power dynamic.
Yeah.
And here's the other thing is like Dylan Ward had told that downstairs basement neighbor at one point that he wanted to replace Victor as Joseph Price's like main spouse.
Yeah, like main partner, yeah.
Like he wanted to have Victor's spot in this relationship. And this was like an ongoing thing that he was trying to, you know, work his way up to like be the main spouse. And I don't know that he was necessarily trying to get rid of Victor from the relationship altogether.
He was just trying to move him down a peg.
Or just move him down a peg. I don't know which one it was. But, you know, this neighbor does tell, you know, police that. What's interesting is that from multiple different accounts, by the time of Robert's murder, that power dynamic of like Dylan Ward really trying to get in Joseph Price's good graces, by the time of Robert's death, that has flip-flopped. And Dylan Ward is kind of becoming uninterested in this relationship. And, you know, I don't know that he was like threatening to leave it.
He's like getting bored, yeah.
But, you know, Joseph Price is feeling like he's having to really work towards keeping Dylan Ward in a relationship with him.
Okay.
Enter the world of sports the way you want with EA Sports College Football 26. Whether you rise through the ranks as a coach or chase greatness from high school recruit to Heisman, build your legacy and wear your colors with pride. Buy College Football 26 now at go.ea.com/MVP-bundle and bring glory home today. EA Sports College Football 26 is rated E for everyone. Includes in-game purchases, including random items.
Choice Hotels get you more for your money so you can maximize any road trip. And as your vacation maximizationer, I'm going to make sure you hear the maximum sizzle of Comfort Inn's free hot breakfast. Let's get real close. Maximum apple. Now that's fresh crispimization. Maximum waffle. Hear that crunch. And that's maximum coffee. Oh yeah, that's the pour I'm talking about. Breakfast maximized before hitting the road. Check into more. Book direct at choicehotels.com.
So the dynamics here are very complex. They're very, you know, obviously they change over time as any relationship does. But I think it's important when we're asking ourselves if these three men were responsible for this, that's a big if, then who actually did it and who's just covering it up. And I think these power dynamics are super, super important.
Yeah.
So we'll get a little bit more into those, but I just kind of wanted to explain that portion of the relationship up front. So like I said, in this BDSM relationship, Price is submissive, Ward is the dominant, and the speculation continues that Robert may have just been rendered helpless via an injection of a paralytic or sedative and then subjected to some form of sexual abuse using Ward's extensive collection of very intense sex toys that were found in the home. And again, these seem to be Dylan Ward's. From every source I've read, these seem to be Dylan Ward's. Okay. I don't know if Dylan Ward had been in other BDSM relationships. I don't know about his past relationship history, but he seems to be the one that brought the BDSM to this relationship for all three men.
Okay.
Again, he's the dominant. That kind of makes sense. These seem to be his toys. So,
man, what I wouldn't give to see what else is in his closet. He had a whole knife set. He had BDSM toys. What else we got?
Emily, you're not ready for what I'm going to tell you about these toys.
Oh, no.
So one of the big questions is if Robert was unconscious or he was paralyzed, how did he ejaculate? Where it ended up.
Yeah.
And that's it. But, the question first is, before we can even ask how it got there, it's, well, how was the semen ejaculated? Okay. If this is an assault.
Yeah.
Now, here's the theory. In this collection of sex toys, they found what is known as the Aerostech electro-ejaculation device.
I'm not going to look up a picture of this up.
No.
I'm not going to do it.
The Aerostech electro-ejaculation device. First of all, the fact that my family might listen to this episode, like my aunts and uncles listen to the podcast. Aunts and uncles, if you're listening, can you just turn off this episode? I've already said too much. But it needs to be talked about. It needs to be talked about because it's important to this case. It's important to this case and it's important to the theories. So let's dive a little bit deeper into this toy because
is there like a acronym we can use to just sum that right up?
Oh, hold on. We're gonna get there.
Okay.
Now, if you guys are like me, you must have thunk when I just said that. Kelsey, what could possibly be an Aerostech electro-ejaculation device? Or some of you, maybe you guys know it well. I don't know.
Somebody's like, hey, I use that.
But according to prosecutor Glenn Kirshner, the ET302R, which is the version of the Aerostech electro-ejaculation device that was found, the ET302R,
okay,
which just sounds like from Star Wars. Yeah. The ET302R device is able to stimulate, quote, electric ejaculation of a person who is under anesthetic or otherwise incapacitated, end quote.
Who?
Again, you may be thinking, again, if you're similar to me, you hear that quote and you say, Kelsey, what is electric ejaculation? Let's talk about how it fits into this theory specifically. We're going to come back to explaining a little bit more about the electric device because I can't say the word ejaculation again. First of all, this episode never going to survive on YouTube. It's going to be one of those ones where everyone's commenting on part 1.
Yeah.
Where's part 2? Where's part 2? Where's part 2? Not on YouTube, I'll tell you that. But the theory goes that at some point during the assault, something went horribly wrong. So they allegedly maybe drug Robert and maybe they gave him too much. Maybe he started to come out of sedation or threatened to expose what was happening. He started to wake up. Maybe they were trying to make him unconscious so he wouldn't know what happened to him. Ooh. And maybe he woke up and whatever went wrong, they're thinking something went wrong. Mm-hmm. And the decision was made to murder him, perhaps as a desperate cover-up of the assault. So the theory is that if these men did it, if these men were involved, according to the prosecution's theory, it's that murder probably wasn't the plan. The plan was sexual assault.
Yeah.
Something went wrong and they killed him to cover it up. In this theory, one of the men, though the prosecution never alleges exactly who, but it sounds like they don't think it's Victor Zaborsky. They think it's either Dylan Price or Dylan Price.
I was like, wait,
Dylan Ward or Joseph Price. But the theory is that one of the men stabbed Robert to ensure that he couldn't speak of the incident. Now, in a similar theory, others speculate that maybe they had accidentally overdosed Robert. So again, maybe they're trying to paralyze him or they're trying to make him unconscious so they could assault him, possibly, maybe, allegedly, and that They overdosed him. They gave him too much because they don't have any medical, background or knowledge.
Nope.
And that they thought he had died from the drugs. Maybe they thought like he, wasn't waking up. He's not responsive. He's not moving. Some of these drugs can like slow down your heart rate. It can, make it, I would imagine it would make it difficult to find vital signs in someone when you don't have any like medical equipment to do so.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe they accidentally overdosed him. They thought they killed him from the drugs and they panicked. We have to cover this up. How can we make this look like we didn't do it? And so the stabbing, allegedly, maybe in this theory, was an attempted cover-up of what they thought was an accidental killing. However, they stabbed him, but he was still alive. Did that make sense? I feel like I really...
No, that makes sense.
Was not clear and concise there.
No, that made sense.
So both of these are basically two different versions of the same theory, is that the motive was a sexual assault. Something went wrong, and the killing was a cover-up attempt. And both theories then posit that the trio allegedly collaborated to clean the bathroom, redress Robert, position his body, plant the false knife, and agree on this intruder story. All in that brief window before calling 911. That's what's fucking crazy about this, is this about an hour and 20 minute timeline since Robert arrives at the house. Now, I will say we talked a lot about the injection sites. They also, in all of their stories, they always say that when Robert first got there, Victor Zaborsky's in bed watching Project Runway already. Mm-hmm. But Dylan Ward and Joseph Price are down in the kitchen and they stand and have a glass of water with Robert before they go to bed. Mm-hmm. And some people say maybe he had been drugged from that glass of water, which is possible. We don't know. But because there's puncture wounds, I personally feel if he was drugged, it would make more sense because no one can account for all those puncture wounds. Yeah. Where did they come from?
Well,
but no one knows.
If it was whatever that drug is, can you ingest it? Like that wouldn't show in your
I don't know. I don't
stomach?
think for succinylcholine, I don't think it would work the same way.
Yeah.
But maybe ketamine or maybe there's something else out there. But those are the two leading theories, is that it was either ketamine or succinylcholine. But yeah, I mean, we don't even have definitive proof that he was drugged.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
there's just nothing else that would explain the way
that's the thing about this case is like, I feel like there's so much evidence and there's so many theories, but they're all conflicting and it's all speculation. We just don't know. There's so many question marks here. Proponents of this theory basically point to the overwhelming forensic evidence of staging and the unified front that the three men have presented. It's basically this conspiracy of silence. The men have maintained solidarity, each presumably confident that the authorities cannot prosecute what they cannot definitively unravel. Because here's the thing. If you say, and I'm just picking a random one right now, mm-hmm. If you say, I believe Dylan Ward was the one that stabbed Robert, there is always, unless one of them talks, going to be reasonable doubt that it could have been one of the others who did it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I think the general consensus from
literally everyone.
Law enforcement, the internet, everything, the general consensus, the theory that people stand by, and this is very generalized because they all vary on the details, mm-hmm. is that these men did it and they are colluding together to cover it up. And it seems like, you know, in some people's opinion, and maybe mine, possibly allegedly, that seems very evident. That seems very obvious. And it's like, at first glance, it's like open and shut, right? But how do you convict one of them beyond a reasonable doubt? Because there's not evidence pointing to, if it was one of these men, which one it was.
Yeah.
We just believe it was one of them, and the others covered it up. But it's like there's no definitive evidence to say which one. And you can't just convict all three people, you know.
On nothing, yeah.
Exactly. And that's what makes this case so fucked up to me. I just hate those cases where, in my opinion, they're so fucking obvious what happened, mm-hmm. and yet people can't be held responsible. And this is a case where I understand.
Like all of the evidence is insane. Like,
this is a case for me, like, where I understand why you can't convict one of them on murder unless someone fucking talks. It seems like. I hope I'm wrong. Well, first of all, I wish one of them would just be a good person and talk if they do know what happened. But it's just like, that's what it is. It's this conspiracy of silence. That's what it is.
Yeah.
As long as no one talks. When it comes to murder, if it was one of them, I don't know how you're ever going to convict them beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yeah.
Which is so sad.
Without a confession.
Now, Despite how sus the three men were looking, no one was ever charged with the murder of Robert Wone. And I think I just kind of explained why already. However, they were charged with something, with a little something. And it took 2 years for prosecutors to build a case focusing on the alleged cover-up, because they're like, okay, well, allegedly, maybe possibly, we know that we believe that these men are colluding together to cover this up, and one of them probably did it, but we can't prove that beyond a reasonable doubt, but we can prove that they are covering it up. The prosecutors thought that they could. So in October of 2008, a DC grand jury indicted Joseph Price, Victor Zaborsky, and Dylan Ward, not for homicide, but on charges of obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and evidence tampering related to Robert's death. The indictment essentially accused the trio of lying to police, altering the crime scene, and hiding evidence to impede the murder investigation. All three defendants pleaded not guilty and remained free pending trial, albeit they were monitored. I guess it's like, okay, well, that's the justice system, protecting civilians and our rights, I guess, but also frustrating to me. Now, they steadfastly maintained their innocence and stuck to the intruder story during pre-trial proceedings. The criminal trial took place in summer of 2010 in the District of Columbia Superior Court. And this is interesting as well, because in a strategic move, the defense team decided to waive their right to a jury trial. So, as an American citizen, you have the right to a trial by jury for, I don't know what level of criminal charges, but for sure for something like this. And they decided, we don't want a jury of our peers deciding this. We want the judge to make the final decision on this. And so they waived this option to the jury trial, and the case was heard bench style by Judge Lynn Leibowitz, meaning this one judge is going to determine whether they're guilty or innocent. Or
so it's like
guilty or not guilty.
Whatever she thinks.
Right. And this was a very smart strategic move because depending on the case, I think the judge is probably more likely in a lot of scenarios to stick more to the law and what is reasonable doubt versus the public, but I don't know that that's always true. So the defendants themselves did not testify during the trial, and the case hinged on this kind of circumstantial evidence. But I also think there's a lot of physical evidence too. But a lot of circumstantial evidence and expert testimony presented by the prosecution versus alternative explanations posited by the defense. Now, the prosecution team was led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Glenn Kirshner, and basically, they laid out a narrative that Robert Wone was killed inside the house and that the crime scene was deliberately altered by the three housemates to mislead investigators. So we already kind of know the details of this theory, but I want to talk about exactly what they presented at trial, because I feel like we've gone back and forth with like 15 possible explanations for every little piece of evidence. So I want to talk about what they actually put into the trial. So the first thing they focused on was the forensic anomalies. So the tidy state of the scene and the minimal blood, that's all emphasized. That is not normal for this type of scene if this was some sort of intruder. So experts testified that the lack of blood and the presence of wiped blood stains strongly indicated that a cleanup occurred before police arrived at the scene. The blood transfer on the knife and the fact that a matching smaller knife was missing that actually matched the wounds, while this one didn't necessarily match the wounds, that was highlighted to show a planted weapon scenario. Why is an intruder planting a weapon? Like, again, this is with such a whodunit, like, clue case.
Yeah.
An FBI analyst and the DC medical examiner outlined how Robert's wounds and clothing were inconsistent with the knife in evidence, bolstering the claim that the knife had been swapped out and the real weapon must have been disposed of. Though, again, they never found this other knife because, according to Dylan Ward's mom, she took it before ever gifting him the knife set, which is
interesting and false in my opinion.
To me, that sounds unlikely in my humble opinion. Now, they also touched on the chemical incapacitation theory. So they introduced the pattern of needle marks and the absence of defensive wounds to argue that Robert had to have been incapacitated by some sort of injection before the stabbing. They also think it's possible that something may have been put into that glass of water, like I mentioned. But again, then why are there these unexplained needle marks? Now, while acknowledging that toxicology was inconclusive, prosecutors suggested drugs like a paralytic agent could have been used in a way that left no trace by the time of testing. Again, succinyl choline moves through the system real quick. I don't believe that it was tested for. I could not find any record of succinylcholine being tested for in that toxicology report. I don't believe it's a normal thing they would test for, but also, even if they did and it was negative, it's
possible it still could have been.
Yeah, it still could have been used. So this kind of explains how the murder could have been carried out without resistance or outcry. Now, in the pre-trial hearings, Kirshner put forward a provocative theory that the motive for the cover-up was to hide this sexual assault that preceded the murder. The prosecution argued that Price and Ward in particular had a history of BDSM sexual practices, and that night they may have engaged in non-consensual acts on Robert, a close friend who trusted him while he was immobilized from their own doing. They pointed to the unusual semen evidence and the assortment of BDSM devices seized from Ward's room, including the electric Aerostech device capable of inducing ejaculation in an unconscious person. And this is basically to support this narrative of like, hey, this semen evidence is very difficult to explain. It's very unusual, but there's something in the home that could possibly explain it. Does that mean definitively 100% that's what happened? No, but the math is able to math there.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now, in the preliminary hearing, prosecutors alleged that over nearly an hour, Robert was, quote, tortured, incapacitated, sexually assaulted, had 8 needle marks, and was sexually suffocated, end quote. Because remember, we talked about in the autopsy, there was petechial hemorrhaging in his eyes.
Yeah.
But there wasn't like a ton of like bruising. It didn't look like he had been strangled to death by any means.
Yeah.
You didn't see the normal things that you would see if someone is killed
like
by strangulation.
Yeah.
So they think that maybe the petechial hemorrhaging was from some sort of BDSM, like sexual suffocation. Now, they say that after this possible sexual suffocation, they finally stabbed him. When things went too far, something went wrong. Again, they don't know exactly what it is, but something went wrong and Robert was stabbed because of whatever went wrong here. The judge, however, ultimately barred the most salacious evidence, which is that BDSM gear that was found in the home. She barred it from being shown in court, concerned that it would be prejudicial without definitively linking, because there was no DNA of Robert's on any of these devices. There's nothing that definitively linked them to Robert, to any sexual assault of Robert, or to Robert's murder. Okay. So she says that because it's so, like, it's such intense BDSM stuff that, like, this is prejudicial to the case. And there's no definitive evidence saying that it is connected. This is why it's so interesting about the bench trial. Because the judge knew of this evidence, but her job is to now say, but I'm not going to take that into account when I make my decision.
That's what I was thinking. I was like, well, there's no jury, so like, why would she bar that from the case? That's weird.
Because she has to make a definitive ruling that, like, hey, because otherwise, if she doesn't make a definitive ruling about that, that maybe it was something that if they were convicted, they could have like appealed saying, oh, we didn't get a fair trial or something because this shouldn't have been taken into consideration. Okay. But I always find that interesting, even with like when they do it with the jury, when something is said in court and they're like telling the jury to disregard it. It's like, that's where I feel like it was very smart of them and strategic to waive a trial by jury and go with a bench trial, because I feel like the judge is more likely to actually, I think the average person, it's hard to forget about those things.
Yeah.
Well, even when you're told not to.
It's Wednesday Addams. I see you're trying to distract yourself from your own banal thoughts. Let me help. Here's a recording thing made of my latest root canal.
Wednesday, Season 2, begins August 6th, only on Netflix.
Get lost in the acoustic brilliance of 3D audio that surrounds you. Feel the embrace of the massage seats that adapt to your every move. Experience the warmth of a vehicle that welcomes you as you approach. We could tell you what makes a Lincoln SUV so extraordinary, but don't take our word for it. Take it on a test drive at the Lincoln Summer Invitation, with exclusive offers on now, only at your local Lincoln retailer.
It's back to school season, and Clorox is donating 2 million disinfecting wipes to classrooms across America. Because back to school means things can get a little bit messy, just ask second grade teacher Mr. Torres.
Put me and just one Clorox wipe on a team? We can take on crayon smudges, sticky fingerprints on every surface, sneezes on the door handle, juice box explosion by the sink, snack crumbs, and don't even get me started on the bathroom passes.
Clorox Disinfecting Wipes, teacher's #1 wipe.
Think about it. Bathroom passes.
Clean feels good. Based on unit sales data.
I mean, the semen, like, how the fuck did that get there?
Again. And
You
so
know?
they could talk about the semen and everything, but they couldn't use these BDSM toys that were found as an explanation. Okay. And that's why, by the way, that's why this podcast is called A Trial by Podcast. Because in case anyone doesn't get that, the satire in that, the joke is like, people always say trial by media, like Scott Peterson got, convicted by the media, and it's unfair because the media is not fair and it doesn't have the rules of the court and whatever. And that's the joke, is that this podcast is a trial by media. It's a trial by podcast. We are not experts. We are not judges. We're not a jury. We're not lawyers. We're not journalists. We're just people. We're armchair bitches. And
armchair yappers.
And we are going to consider facts, opinions, stuff that would not be allowed to be considered in a court of law. And I think we all have to remember that when we're talking about true crime, because again, we do a lot of like finger pointing in true crime at people who have not been convicted. Is this person involved? Is that person involved? I think it's a fair conversation to have, but you also have to keep in mind that, you can't, if someone's not convicted, they're found not guilty, there's a reason that the court, a trial by jury or a trial by bench trial by judge, is not the same as a trial by podcast. And that's the joke. But because I think sometimes I worry that people click on us expecting us to be like
facts
trial experts,
yeah,
like legal experts, because we say a trial by podcast. And I'm like, I hope they're not just like, these bitches don't know anything about court. Like, that's the joke.
We really
that's
don't.
what. So again, this all seems like a good move. Her saying that this, when you're trying to give the defendants a fair trial, and she says that this cannot be admitted, it seems like a good move to give them a fair trial. But again, this is a trial by podcast, so we're not barring any evidence here. And with that being said, let's get into some freaky shit real quick. Again, if my family, I already told you to turn it off, but if you're still listening,
trigger warning.
It's your fault at this point. So, according to an article by Rend Smith for the Washington City paper, a D.C. cop named Sergeant James Plant was brought onto the case as almost like a consultant because apparently he was a sex toy expert thanks to his, quote, more than a decade of experience with gay sadomasochistic practices, end quote. And that's from like the court records, that quote. Like, okay. And first of all, what a fucking resume bullet point for this sergeant.
Right?
But honestly, like, I respect him for like letting his freak flag fly and coming forward to help the police in this case. Because like they needed
an expert,
assistance, and they needed an expert. And also,
he said,
here's the thing: when an expert is testifying, you want someone that the court, whether it's the judge or the jury or whoever it may be, someone that they're going to respect that person's expert opinion. Mm-hmm. So having a sergeant, like a police sergeant, be the one to be the expert about this stuff, I think probably is a better move than like bringing in someone from the adult store, down the road. Yeah. You know what I mean? Because he's a sergeant. He's probably highly respected.
Yeah.
So good for this guy for saying, I know a lot about this. Let me help you, because there are a lot of people, this is what I hear, that practice BDSM safely, consensually, and they're doing all the things right and well, and no one's dying, no one's, getting hurt in a way that they don't want to, apparently. And so he's like, let me tell you all about this. Okay. So according to court filings and police warrant affidavits, detectives found numerous bondage and electrostimulation devices throughout the home. So we already talked about the Aerostech, whatever. We're going to get into that in a second. But there's more. They found floggers, assorted dildos, a scrotal harness with weighted attachments, black hoods, arm restraints, collars, gags, and impact tools.
Damn, they were into BDSM. Damn.
And again, I'm going to rephrase this. I've said it a couple times. If you're wondering, Kelsey, what's an impact tool? I don't know, and I didn't Google it. So if you guys want to Google that, you can do that. But I was sticking to reading about this stuff in regards to this case, when they're talking about it in this case. And I did not do any other research outside of the, articles about this actual case itself. But there are a lot of articles from the Washington City paper. Like there's multiple different ones about the toys and everything. So if you want to hear more about it, you can read it there. But yeah, I don't know what an impact tool is. I just scrotal harness with weighted
that
sounds so painful.
Yeah.
And I don't have a scrotum, but that sounds so painful.
Yeah.
That sounds so painful. So in court papers, Plant explained item number 24. Here's the description of the item, number 24, and what it is used for. Okay? Quote, a pair of chrome-plated O-rings in graduating sizes from large to small, attached to a black leather strap, largest ring worn over the base of the penis and behind scrotal sac, while other rings enclose the penile shaft, known as the gates of hell, due to discomfort created when penis is erect, end quote. I think we should leave that silence in. You know, normally we cut. I'm going to read it one more time because I just feel like it's the way it's written is kind of hard to understand. A pair of chrome-plated O-rings in graduating sizes from large to small, attached to a black leather strap, largest ring worn over the base of the penis. So then every ring's getting smaller and smaller. Largest ring worn over the base of the penis and behind scrotal sac, while the other rings enclose the penile shaft, known as the gates of hell, due to discomfort created when penis is erect.
Sorry, but will never own one of those or use it on anybody.
And from what I hear, there's a lot of people that are just nice, good people practicing very safe, very consensual BDSM with age-appropriate and consenting partners. So I don't want to yuck yums here.
That sounds painful, though.
I think but that's kind of that's the point. That's the point of BDSM. So that is painful,
intense.
So anyway. The gates of hell. The gates of hell due to discomfort created when the penis is erect. Now, most notably, and let me pause really quick. I'm going to tell you about what the police seized here. I want to talk about this separate from this case for a moment. I just want to talk about the existence of this item alone for a moment, separate from this case. Because honestly, I found it shocking that people are using this willingly and apparently enjoying it. And again, no hate if you're in that BDSM community, but to me, it was so I just want to talk about this and its existence in a consensual space because I feel like it's going to make your jaw drop as much as it made my jaw drop. I want to talk about the fact that this person had this in their closet and was using this presumably in some sort of consensual encounters with other people. So, most notably, police seized a high voltage electrostimulation device known as the Aerostech ET302R, along with the compatible accessories that go with the ET302R.
You want a charger or you got what?
Well, a flesh-colored butt plug with conductive surfaces and adjustable cock rings designed to deliver electric shocks to the genitals. I think the butt plug made you laugh enough that you didn't hear the rest.
It did not.
A flesh-colored butt plug with conductive surfaces and adjustable cock rings designed to deliver electric shocks to the genitals.
So you're defibrillating your dick?
It is a dick defibrillation device. A DFD, if you will.
A DUFT.
A DFD. A DUFT. So I'm just thinking, I really hope my family turned this off. I can't say it enough. I really hope my family is not listening to this.
That goes for my family too, especially my aunt and uncle, because they're pretty religious. So turn it off.
But here's the thing. We're laughing about these devices and stuff just because to us personally, this is a little bit shocking to read. Yeah. So we're laughing about it.
It's a little bit of a jump scare, you know?
Right. But the reason I'm diving into it, I'm going to be real with you guys. Part of the reason I'm diving into it is because I knew it shocked me. I knew it would shock Emily, and I know it's shocking some of you guys. And I like a shock factor a little bit. But also, I think this is an important part of the discussion to understand this stuff. Because while there's no direct evidence that this toy was used against Robert's will or was used that night in any way, shape, or form, consensual or non-consensual, what the prosecution is saying is that this could have been used to induce ejaculation from an unconscious and or paralyzed person. And while we can laugh about the device separately, that's why I wanted to kind of separate that for a moment, because I know human nature is shock factor. If this was used on Robert or on anyone non-consensually, that is absolutely fucking horrific. That is horrific. I think there's like this human nature in us to laugh about it because we're like, for those of us who don't understand it, because it sounds horrible, it sounds painful, and it is funny. I think people who probably use these consensually can understand why it's funny to people who don't get it. But it's also, you need to remember that if this was used against someone non-consensually, against their will, it is fucking horrific and terrifying. And I think sometimes we forget that when we're talking about men, when a man is the possible victim. Now, again, I want to make it very, very clear that there is no evidence to say that this device was used. The prosecution is just saying that it could have been used to do this. There's no DNA evidence. There's nothing to say that this was used that night. But I think it's an important part of the discussion. And I think it's important for us to talk about, and it's important for people to understand, and it's important for us to form our own opinions about what may have happened here. Mm-hmm. And again, that's to form opinions, not to decide on facts. The judge decided this was not allowed to be considered when deciding upon facts in a court of law. So I want everyone to remember, not only for this episode, but every episode, we discuss stuff for people to form their own opinions and go home and do further research and grow on those opinions and fact check and whatever. We are not here to decide upon facts of what happened here. I just want to make that very clear. But for me, I think that this is when we're sitting here trying to form opinions about what may have happened here. This is very important because, again, that's such a question mark of the semen evidence. How did it end up where it was? And this explains it. Apparently, this device is able to cause like electric ejaculation of someone who is completely unconscious or immobilized. Mm-hmm. Because I don't know that you could do that without some sort of device. I don't know how the, sexual organs are affected by the drugs that may have been used. Mm-hmm. But what they're saying is that this could have done it. And the fact that this is found in the home, I'm not pointing at these guys because they're into BDSM. Pointing at these guys because maybe they seem to have the tools to be capable of doing what was done to Robert here. And I think that's a really important point. And I think sometimes it's glossed over because more professional people don't want to discuss the scrotal sac rings. And I am here to dive deep into scrotal sac rings at any and every chance that I have.
Your Google search history has got to be...
No, it's actually insane. It's actually so crazy. Now, during the trial itself, the government thus focused on this cover-up theory because, again, they're not putting them on trial for homicide, and they're not allowed to show this toy evidence. So they're focusing on the evidence showing that they tampered with the scene, they tampered with evidence, they conspired together to lie to police. And they are trying to show that whatever happened... they say we don't really know the details of what happened. We don't know who did the stabbing. We don't know the exact dynamic of who was involved and who did exactly what. But they're saying whatever happened, the three men acted together to clean the scene, to plant the knife. They delayed calling 911 and they lied to police in order to protect themselves. Those are the accusations against these men. And the prosecution posited that the trio's motive for the cover-up was, quote, to protect the family, end quote. Which, again, conspiracy of silence. So prosecutors hammered on the roughly 20 to 40 minute time gap between the likely time of Robert's death and when the 911 call was made. Because if you remember, that neighbor heard a scream sometime between 11 and 11:30 p.m., but 911 wasn't called until 11:49 p.m. Now, there's a lot of debate about who the scream was from, because you would think, oh, it's from Robert. Well, how is it from Robert if Robert is incapacitated, if he is unconscious? I don't know if he could have screamed if he had been paralyzed, but it doesn't sound like it the way that this case is discussed. So if it wasn't from Robert, who was it from? Well, The theory that I subscribe to, and these are not original thoughts. I heard the prosecutors discuss this. I heard this discussed on a lot of Reddit forums. This is discussed in the console that I talked about last week. This is what I subscribe to. Victor Zaborsky.
That was my first thought too.
And that Victor screamed after he discovered what had been done to Robert. Because there is about somewhere between a 20 and 40 minute time period between that scream and the 911 call. Let's say Victor discovers what has been done to Robert. He screams. They take about 20 to 40 minutes to adjust the evidence to make it look like an intruder, and then they call 911. Now, witnesses at this trial, such as the paramedics, they recounted the strangely calm behavior of the defendants and their inconsistent statements, and not compared to each other, but compared to themselves. One example of this was that Joseph Price mentioned moving the knife at one point, but then he
allegedly
told one person that he pulled the knife out of Robert, but then he had told the police that he had just moved it. The knife was next to Robert and he moved it off the bed onto the nightstand. But he had
allegedly
told a friend or something, like an acquaintance, that he had pulled the knife out of Robert. So that's where they're
allegedly
messing their stories up. They know that something is wrong here. And the reason for the inconsistencies is because they're lying. That's the implication that the prosecution is putting forward. Furthermore, the fact that all three men told the exact same intruder story with no deviation, this is presented as a suspicious coordination. We kind of talked about this last week. A lot of the times, everyone's going to have a different perspective, even if they went through the same series of events, because they're different people. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But as one prosecutor put it, they were three people with the exact same lie. Mm-hmm. So this is all sounding pretty damning. Would you say so?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. So let's talk about the defense team. Because the defense team...
What do they got?
These motherfuckers unfortunately do a fantastic job. The defense team acknowledged the bizarre aspects of the case, but they argued that the prosecution had no direct evidence tying their clients to any crime. They stressed that the government's entire case was circumstantial and built on speculation about motive. I don't understand this. I think there's so much physical evidence in this case. Now, it doesn't directly link these guys specifically, but there's a lot of physical evidence that points to them and points away from an intruder theory. So they're always like, it's circumstantial, it's circumstantial. I'm like, in my opinion, it's not that circumstantial, but that's just me, and I'm not an attorney. So defense lawyers suggested that an unknown intruder could have entered undetected, and that the lack of evidence of this intruder was due to investigative failures. The investigators weren't looking for evidence of an intruder, is the implication here. For instance, they noted that the police did not seriously pursue any other leads once they fixated on the three residents. We hear this in a lot of cases, like maybe because there was no evidence pointing them towards other leads, but I don't know. So this is their defense. They explained the defendant's calm demeanor as shock, or the result of being instructed by counsel, like by their attorneys, to remain composed. The defense also offered innocent explanations for some evidence. For example, they argued the presence of Robert's semen was not proof of assault, citing that fluids can sometimes emerge during the death process or post-mortem. And this is where it gets even more fucking confusing, because this is apparently true. Basically, sometimes, this is from my research, I am not a doctor, but sometimes during decomposition, the male body will produce a fluid that is similar enough to seminal fluid that testing cannot tell the difference between them. And this fluid can be found in the rectum, like during autopsies. However, from my very surface level understanding of this process, it's usually something found after someone has been dead for a day or longer. So it would be weird for that to be the case in Robert's death, because he was found so soon after he died.
Yeah.
And they, I believe, they refrigerate the bodies to stop or at least hold off on the decomposition process. Mm-hmm. So this is possible, though. This is possible.
Hey, it's Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. Now, I was looking for fun ways to tell you that Mint's offer of unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month is back. So I thought it would be fun if we made $15 bills. But it turns out that's very illegal. So there goes my big idea for the commercial. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan equivalent to $15 per month required. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Speed slow after 35 gigabytes if network's busy. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.
This episode is brought to you by Greenlight. Get this. Adults with financial literacy skills have 82% more wealth than those who don't. From swimming lessons to piano classes, us parents invest in so many things to enrich our kids' lives. But are we investing in their future financial success? With Greenlight, you can teach your kids financial literacy skills like earning, saving, and investing. And this investment costs less than that after-school treat. Start prioritizing their financial education and future today with a risk-free trial at greenlight.com/Spotify. Greenlight.com/Spotify.
Parents of tweens, if you're familiar with far-off drop-offs...
Dad, stop, right here.
Or get DMs about what's for dinner, you may be experiencing tween milestones. For your son or daughter, these can start at age 9. HPV vaccination, a type of cancer prevention against certain HPV-related cancers, can start then too.
For most, HPV clears on its own. But for those who don't clear the virus, it can cause certain cancers later in life.
Embrace this phase. Help protect them in the next.
Ask their doctor today about HPV vaccination. Brought to you by Merck.
It sounds unlikely to me. I think
even what they could have argued against that is the prosecution could have argued against that if they allowed the toys to be admitted as evidence.
Right, that's the thing. Yeah, I mean, this is just, it's so confusing to me. I don't understand it. And I also have a lot of questions about like semen versus seminal fluid. And again, my Google search history is just next level because, semen are the swimmers. The seminal fluid are the material in which the swimmers be swimming. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it sounds like there's semen found in it. So many places are calling it semen, but I could not find them specifically differentiating. No, it wasn't just seminal fluid, it was semen. Because it sounds like this fluid created by the decomposition process just mimics seminal fluid, but isn't actually seminal fluid. Therefore, would not have actual swimmers' semen in it.
Right.
That is something that I have been unable to clarify. Was it legit seminal fluid? Was the testing just unable to tell the difference between if this was the fluid created from decomposition or if it was actually seminal fluid, or was there actually semen present in the seminal fluid? I have not been able to determine that. However, it sounds like there was semen.
Yeah.
And also, this is the other thing. This is why I think it was semen. And in my personal opinion, as a non-expert who doesn't fully understand decomposition or this process, this fluid was also found on his genital area, like outside of the body, like not internally, externally, found on his genital area and his inner thighs. So I don't think the decomposition process, that sounded like an internal thing.
Yeah.
It wasn't going to be on the outside of his body, from my very limited understanding that I could be absolutely wrong about. So if there's semen present, and then there's something that looks like semen, or like if there's semen present on the outside of the body, and then there's also something that resembles semen and or seminal fluid inside of the rectum, and it's unlikely or it would be very unusual for it to be from this decomposition process, to me, the math is leaning towards it's more likely than not actual semen or seminal fluid from him ejaculating.
Right.
Okay. So I don't know. But that is their argument. And it sounds like, this is a real thing that happens and it is a possibility. In my opinion, it still sounds rather unlikely, but it is a possibility. Now, perhaps their strongest strategy was emphasizing that no forensic evidence, no DNA, no fingerprints, nothing like that, directly linked Price, Zaborsky, or Ward to Robert's stabbing. None of Robert's blood was found on any of the three men. None of them had injuries or marks on them, like no signs of like defensive wounds. But again, why would they if he was unconscious or paralyzed? And the prosecution couldn't pinpoint who actually wielded the knife. So the prosecution, even though they haven't charged them with homicide, part of their argument is that these men must have killed them and we're just charging them with the aftermath, the tampering with evidence, the conspiracy, and like the cover-up of that murder. But that theory doesn't work without one of them being the killer. And so they're arguing, well, how do we know that one of them's the killer if you can't tell us who the killer is? That's part of the defense's like counter argument, which, I don't know if that's a good point or not, but I think is kind of silly. Now, in essence, the defense contended that while the situation was deeply suspicious, suspicion was not enough for a conviction. There was reasonable doubt here. That's their whole argument. And on June 29th, 2010, after an extensive bench trial, Judge Lynn Leibowitz delivered her verdict, and she found all 3 defendants not guilty on all charges: conspiracy, obstruction, and evidence tampering. Not guilty.
Okay.
In an oral ruling accompanied by a detailed written memorandum, the judge explained that the prosecution had indeed demonstrated that the intruder story was implausible. She agreed it was, quote, very probable, end quote, that no outsider broke in and that the answers to Robert's murder lay with someone inside the house. She even stated that it was likely that the defendants know more than they revealed and had withheld information. However, the standard of proof in a criminal case is beyond a reasonable doubt, and the judge concluded that while the circumstances strongly pointed to wrongdoing, the evidence, in her professional opinion, was insufficient to establish which of the 3, if any, had committed specific acts of evidence tampering or lying to police. So she's saying, I think they're guilty, but I can't say exactly what each one is guilty of.
Right.
And that's the problem here when there's 3 of them. In my opinion, if there was only one other person in this house, this person would have case closed, you're down for murder. The problem is that there's 3 of them, and who did what, it seems that they're not able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. For instance, because all 3 maintained the same account, they stuck to their story, she couldn't exclude the possibility, however remote, that an unknown intruder might have done it and that the roommates simply didn't see him, or that one defendant acted without the other's knowledge. Which, honestly, I think that's the only good point this judge makes, is like, how do you prove that all 3 of them knew? And that, like we talked about, a lot of people believe that Victor Zaborsky was the one that screamed and that he wasn't as involved as the other 2. But how do you prove that he also knew?
Right.
Is it possible, like, let's say theoretically, if Ward and Price did this, is it possible that Victor Zaborsky doesn't know and they just have like a don't ask, don't tell policy going in the household?
Yeah.
I don't know, and that's to me the only point, because I was really trying to understand this judge's ruling, because in my humble opinion, I think the judge got this wrong. And I hate to say that. Obviously, this judge is much more well-versed in the law than I am. But I think, in my mind, if I was a juror, even without the evidence of the sex toys, I don't think I could have convicted them of homicide beyond a reasonable doubt. But I personally think, beyond a reasonable doubt, this is my personal opinion, because they have been found not guilty in a court of law. In my personal opinion, I see there's no doubt in my mind that these men are covering this up.
Yeah.
I don't know. So the judge, as she's giving this ruling, she expresses her frustration with her own ruling, saying in substance, basically like, look, I think these men know exactly what happened and they have a reason to cover it up, but I can't convict them on conjecture. And thus, all 3 men were acquitted of criminal charges and walked out of court free. Now, it's worth emphasizing that this verdict was not an exoneration of innocence, but rather a reflection of the prosecution's inability to meet the high burden of proof. The judge said herself that, she notes the likelihood that the defendants were involved, stating, quote, "It is very probable that the government's theory is correct, that some or all of them know enough to provide helpful information and have chosen to withhold it," end quote. But legally, that probability did not amount to proof beyond a reasonable doubt. After the verdict, authorities stated that the homicide case would remain open indefinitely, since no one had been charged with the murder itself and the true killer was still unaccounted for. Now, in the wake of the criminal trial acquittals, Robert's wife, Kathy, pursued accountability through civil litigation. So in November of 2008, which this is before the criminal trial took place, because that was in 2010. Kathy filed a $20 million wrongful death lawsuit against Price, Zaborsky, and Ward in D.C. Superior Court. The civil suit accused the 3 men of participation in or cover-up of the murder of her husband, holding them liable for his death under a preponderance of evidence standard. So, basically, in a criminal court, You have to be proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. In a civil court, the standard to find someone liable is lower. So in a civil case with the preponderance of evidence standard, the jury basically just has to lean more to one side than the other in order to make a decision. So someone could be found liable even though a jury wouldn't say beyond a reasonable doubt. They just said, I think it's more likely that they were, that they did cover this up.
Yeah.
So Kathy's attorneys effectively alleged that one or more of the defendants killed Robert and that the others either assisted or conspired to prevent the truth from coming out. And the civil case did end up being put on hold during the criminal proceedings. But once the criminal trial concluded in mid-2010, the wrongful death suit moved forward. Notably, when faced with civil discovery, Price, Zaborsky, and Ward all indicated that they would invoke their Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination rather than answer questions under oath about the events of that night. So, basically, they're like, all right, depose us. We're just going to say, I invoke my Fifth Amendment right, which is their right to do. In a civil court, a jury is allowed to draw negative inferences from a defendant's refusal to testify, which is interesting because in a criminal court, the jury's instructed, that's their right, and you are not allowed to judge them, based on that. But in a civil court, you're allowed to be judgy. And this strengthened Kathy's position. It's like, well, why aren't you fucking talking? And they're allowed to take that into consideration. The prospect of all three men pleading the fifth in depositions and at trial set the stage for a difficult defense. It's hard for the defense to argue back when they don't want to talk about anything. Mm-hmm. And the judge in the civil case had scheduled the matter for trial in fall of 2011, which could have publicly revisited all of the evidence and possibly revealed new information under a lower burden of proof. But before the civil trial could even take place, the parties reached an out-of-court settlement that we don't know what the settlement is.
What the fuck?
Not allowed to talk about it. But yeah.
What?
Undisclosed a sum of money. So I hope Kathy is fucking rolling in it.
Right. I hope they, I don't know.
Rolling in money, by the way. I hope people know what I meant by that. I was maybe that came off bad. I hope she's rolling in money from them.
Yeah.
Because that's the absolute fucking least that they could do. Yeah. Now, the specific terms, again, are confidential, but Kathy's legal team acknowledged that a financial payment was made to Robert's estate. In exchange, Kathy agreed to dismiss the case, and by all accounts, no admission of wrongdoing was ever made by the defendants as part of the settlement. Kathy stated that she pursued the suit in order to find the truth and hold those responsible accountable. However, given the defendant's intent to remain silent, a settlement avoided a protracted legal battle with little guarantee of full transparency. She was probably not going to get much more, and money wasn't her goal. Her goal was for answers, and I think she got to the point where she realized she wasn't going to get those answers, which fucking breaks my heart for her.
That sucks.
My heart breaks for this woman. Not only just losing her husband, but all of the speculation around, if he was gay, if he wasn't, and why was he there, and all of these things that are just horrible. And it's the woman knows her husband.
Yeah.
The woman knows her husband. And I understand that there are people who are closeted, but usually you would expect to find some sort of evidence showing that, porn sites or whatever it may be. And there wasn't anything. But that just adds a layer of complexity to this of losing your husband who was murdered. And now you have to be defending his sexuality, which is upsetting.
Yeah.
While the state seemed to pitch the idea that it may have been Ward and Price together who killed Robert, some alternative speculation focuses on whether the crime could have been the act of one person in the house, with the other two covering them out of loyalty or fear. And within this framework, various web sleuths have debated who the sole culprit might be. And I think the consensus among everyone is it's not Victor Zaborsky. People do not believe that Victor Zaborsky is the one who did this killing. However, it kind of goes back and forth depending on who you ask, for those who do not believe the intruder theory, whether it was Dylan Ward or Joe Price. So when it comes to Dylan Ward, with his interest in domination and the presence of his BDSM toys, a lot of people lean towards Dylan Ward being the main perpetrator, perhaps acting on a fantasy and then enlisting Price and Zaborsky's help to clean up when things went too far. Another view targets Joe Price, the alpha of the household, as someone who might have initiated a non-consensual encounter or a lethal confrontation with Robert, because he was the one that was closest to Robert. So it seems how could this be happening under his nose without him being involved? Now, Even Victor Zaborsky, though considered the most emotionally shaken of the trio, he's not entirely spared by speculation. Like, no one just thinks if they don't believe in the intruder theory, they definitely are believing that Victor Zaborsky took part in this cover-up. But the judge's verdict and her comments about that verdict kind of contemplated these possibilities. She noted the evidence, saying it didn't distinguish whether one defendant's guilt was greater than the others, and thus she could not pinpoint an individual as more guilty than the others. The men themselves have never pointed fingers at each other, and without their cooperation, it's difficult to assess individual guilt. Again, if they indeed are guilty, maybe they're telling the truth and this was an intruder. That is legally, technically a possibility. Nonetheless, the individual actor plus cover-up theory is essentially a subset of a broader cover-up idea. It acknowledges that all three likely colluded in deception, but posits that not all may have participated in the physical assault or murder. This nuance doesn't change the ultimate mystery of who actually wielded the knife. And to date, no evidence has surfaced that cleanly implicates one of the housemates over the others. And so it remains conjecture. There is one theory that circulates online as well, that there were 3 stab wounds and there were 3 men in the house. Were they all equally complicit? And they all...
That was like their bond, their blood bond.
That was like, hey, we have to kill him and we're all going to stab him, so we're all equally complicit, so like none of us will talk. That's this theory.
I can see it.
There's the issue with this, though, is that those stab wounds were so similar and they were done at the exact same angle and they were done so perfectly and they were all right about the same depth that experts think it's unlikely.
Probably the same person.
They think more likely than not this was one person that made all 3 stab wounds. Okay. So now I'm going to deviate from my script a little bit because I feel like we've kind of talked about this, but I want to give you guys my opinion on what may have happened here. This is my opinion. This is not fact. These men were found not guilty of conspiracy and all of those charges. They have never been convicted of murdering anybody. They are free men. And what I am about to say could be right. It could be wrong. Parts could be right. Parts could be wrong. Do your own research. Okay. Here's where, in my opinion, I believe the evidence is pointing to. I think Robert Wone asked to stay the night. And I think Joseph Price and Dylan Ward were in this BDSM relationship. And to me, it seems that they may have been, pushing boundaries a little bit. And what's a boundary to push? Consent is a boundary to push. That's a possibility. And I think that they decided, or one decided, that they were going to drug Robert Wone somehow. I think it seems more likely that this was an injection rather than something in the water. I don't know what they drugged him with. I don't know if it was a paralytic. I don't know if it made him unconscious. I don't know. I think Victor Zaborsky's in bed. He's not a part of the sexual assault. And I think that the evidence points to Joseph Price and Dylan Ward being involved in this sexual assault of Robert Wone. I think the BDSM toy, the Aerostack 302 TR75, whatever it was used to force Robert to ejaculate against his will. I think something was then used in this process that was then inserted into his body, and that is how his semen got into his body. I think that they probably overdosed him, and they either thought he was dead or they felt sure that he was going to die from this, and they couldn't call 911 because how do you explain why he's drugged? Some people speculate that maybe he had become conscious or realized what's going on during this time. I don't think so, because the evidence seems to point to the idea that he was not moving when these stab wounds were made, aka not conscious or unable to move. So I think they thought they overdosed him. They thought he was either dead or they thought he was going to die. And they said, fuck, what can we do? I think one of them stabbed him. I don't know which one. People lean towards Ward.
Your burger is served. And this is our finest Pepsi Zero Sugar. Its sweet profile perfectly balances the savory notes of your burger.
That is one perfect combination.
Burgers deserve Pepsi.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
I'm Cindy Lauper with fellow Cosentyx advocate, Chef Michelle Bernstein.
We'll share our experiences with plaque psoriasis, with psoriatic arthritis, and Dr. Panika will talk about the possible connection.
Cosentyx secukinumab is prescribed for adults with moderate to severe plaque psoriasis 300 milligram dose and adults with active psoriatic arthritis 150 milligram dose. Don't use if you're allergic to Cosentyx. Before starting, get checked for tuberculosis. An increased risk of infections and lowered ability to fight them may occur, like tuberculosis or other serious bacterial, fungal, or viral infections. Some are fatal. Tell your doctor if you have an infection or symptoms like fevers, sweats, chills, muscle aches, or cough, had a vaccine or plan to, or if inflammatory bowel disease symptoms develop or worsen. Serious allergic reactions and severe eczema-like skin reactions may occur.
Learn more at 1-844-COSENTYX or Cosentyx.com/Cindy.
I don't really think there's evidence to point to one or the other. I think people lean towards Ward because of the BDSM stuff and him being like the dominant and him having the toys. The only piece of evidence that I think points more towards Ward and less towards Joseph Price is the knife. If that missing knife from his closet was indeed the murder weapon, to me that indicates that it was more likely Ward that did the stabbing. However, that knife has never been found. We do not know for certain that that knife was what did it. So, yeah, that's where I can see why some of this sex toy evidence wasn't admitted in court. I think that makes people lean towards Dylan Ward, depending on the person that you're asking. But I don't know out of the two who did it. I think if it was that knife from his closet, I think it was probably Dylan Ward. But who knows? Maybe he said, I have a knife. Why they didn't just use a knife from the kitchen, I don't fucking know. Maybe a knife was being used as part of the sexual play, and then it was already in the room, and then that's why it was used. And then they said, oh, but how would the intruder get this knife? We have to make it look like it was a kitchen knife. I don't know. I think they start covering this up. I think at some point, I don't know if Victor was woken up by them on purpose and told what was happening, or if he woke up of his own accord and came down and found it. I think that scream was Victor.
Yeah, I think that
discovering that Robert was killed. I think that's why the 911 call was delayed after the scream. And I think they took the next 20 to 40 minutes to get their fucking story straight and switch out the knife and get rid of some evidence. And then they called 911. That is what I think is likely. In my personal opinion, that is what the evidence points. That's the path the evidence takes me down in my mind. That doesn't mean that that's what happened. Do I think it's possible that an intruder did this? Do I think it's possible? Sure. Do I think it's likely? Not a single cell in my body thinks that is likely, that this was an intruder. Is it possible? Sure. Of course, anything is possible. What do you think?
Personally, I think Dylan is the one that was doing that. I don't honestly know if Joe had a whole lot to do with it besides covering it up. I don't know.
So do you
think Dylan was who did it? Because everything was his, the knife, the tools, the whatever. And he was, I mean, Robert was Joe's friend. So yeah, I think Dylan was jealous that they had a cool relationship. I don't know. Like they were just friends. And he's like, oh, how can I get back at Joe? Let me fuck around with his friend and drug him and do whatever I want to him. And then I do think that it probably went bad. And then Joe found him, or I don't know. But I do think that Victor had nothing to do with it. And he probably just came down after like hearing them maybe argue about it. I don't know.
Yeah.
And that's what the scream was.
Yeah.
My gut is telling me it was Dylan, but
I think a lot of people lean towards Dylan as being the one who actually did the stabbing. And to me, that does make sense just because, you know, they seem to believe that it was his knife from his closet that was used. We don't have evidence to prove that, but that's what they seem to believe. And if that is the case, I do think it was Dylan who likely did the stabbing. My only thing is, like, I do believe that Joseph, like, I feel like if Dylan Ward just acted completely alone on the sexual assault and the stabbing, and then the other two just discovered it, I don't know that they would have lied for him. You know what I mean? Like, they were like spouses, and Dylan Ward was like less important. And I think, why would they put themselves in jeopardy when they had, if they genuinely had nothing to do with it? Why would they cover it up for him?
That's true.
I mean, it had been a couple years, I think, that he was part of this relationship.
Mm-hmm.
But I just don't think that, like, it just seems more believable that Victor and Joseph would cover up for one another than just covering up for Dylan Ward. And specifically, Dylan Ward, remember, he had told that neighbor he wanted to replace Victor as, like, Joseph's main spouse at one point.
Yeah.
That makes me think that, like, how did Victor feel about Dylan Ward? Because Victor and Dylan Ward, I do believe, it sounds like there was some sort of, like, romantic and sexual relationship between those two, but it seemed like it centered around Joseph Price. Like, Joseph was the main one that they each wanted, and, like, they were each closer with Joseph than they were with each other. So if it was just Dylan Ward, to me, I don't see the motivation for Victor specifically to cover up for Dylan Ward. I see it for Joe because, remember, by the time of Robert's death, that, like, power dynamic between Joe and Dylan has kind of swapped. Like, Dylan was really wanting to take Victor's place, but by this point, Dylan's kind of, like, fucking over it, and Joseph is, like, trying to keep him around. So, like, Joseph seems to be, like, very attached to Dylan Ward in some way, but again, I just don't see why would Victor, unless he's just covering it up to protect Joe covering it up. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know, man.
And that's the thing about this case. And to me, that's what this case is, a fucking tragedy because, like, again, it's one of those cases where I feel the basics of what happened here are relatively obvious, in my opinion. But I also see why legally this is such a struggle to hold whoever did this accountable, because it really is, like, the details matter. When there's three of them, you can't just guess which one committed homicide if it was one of them. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I just strongly don't feel that it was anyone else outside of the house. So that's just my opinion.
So, yeah. And I know you guys are saying, I hate stories like this with endings like this, but in the years following the trial and the civil suit, Price, Zaborsky, and Dylan Ward, they just largely withdrew from the public eye, and they eventually left Washington, D.C. because obviously this is like...
Everybody knows who you are.
This is a very famous true crime case. This is very famous in D.C. It's very famous in the gay community in D.C. because they were, these men were so influential in that community. And, like, Joseph Price, really seemed to do a lot for the LGBTQ community in D.C. And, I think he was probably no longer wanted as a leader in the community after this.
Yeah.
Rightfully so, in my opinion. And the once tight trio did not remain living together long term, but they seem to maintain their bond because they seem to still refuse to talk about this. Around 2011, both Price and Ward legally changed their last names. That information is available online, but I don't like vigilante justice, so you guys do with that information what you will. There's more information available online. But what's interesting is Price changed their last names. Victor Zaborsky's not changed his name, which again to me is an indication that he is not as culpable in this as the other two seem to be.
Do we know if they're still together? Like, are they still a throuple?
They are not still a throuple, but Joseph Price and Victor Zaborsky are still in a relationship together. From what I could find, I could not find anything about them breaking up. I did find reports about them being together years later, but not, July of 2025. So basically, by 2011, Price and Zaborsky had relocated to South Florida. Records show that they jointly bought a home in Miami, Florida. And according to the Washington Blade, Ward lived for a period of time in the Pacific Northwest. In 2015, he surfaced in Seattle working as a massage therapist and Pilates instructor under his new name. And he did later move to Miami as well, joining a Pilates studio there. But I don't believe that he moved there and, like, lived with the other two. I think he's Audi 5000 of that throuple. I think that seems to have ended. Price found employment in Miami with an immigrant advocacy nonprofit and later with a consulting firm called Gaping Void, leveraging his skills as an attorney, though he left Gaping Void after his past became known in a news article and he was like kind of outed. Yeah, yikes. Yeah, I mean, you want to work with these men respectfully, even though they're not convicted. I don't want to work with them.
Vibes are not good.
Zaborsky appears to have continued his career in marketing. As of 2016, he was listed as a VP at Milk Pep in DC, though he too spent time in Florida where his partner resettled. Now, the murder case obviously cast a shadow over their personal and professional lives, but by changing identities and relocating, they were trying to move on. Now, none of the three have ever given any public interview or statement about Robert's murder beyond maintaining their innocence through their lawyers. So, like, they don't talk to the press. And officially, Robert's homicide case remains open and unsolved. DC Metropolitan Police have never closed the file, and it is technically classified as a cold case. After the criminal trial, authorities reiterated that if new evidence or witness testimony emerged, they could still bring murder charges. And that's why they were never charged with homicide, is because they knew they couldn't convict anyone beyond a reasonable doubt. And it's like, if they're acquitted, you can never charge them again. But there is an opportunity here that if more information comes out, whoever committed this homicide can be convicted of homicide. And I just thought of one thing. I'd wanted to say this earlier, and then we got off topic, and I couldn't remember what I wanted to say. I remember what it is now. Victor Zaborsky, we keep talking about how it seems, the evidence seems to point to him being a little bit less involved than the others. And, you know, I just want to add, if these men are covering this up, and one of them is responsible and the others are covering it up, or two are responsible, the third's covering it up, Victor Zaborsky is still a fucking asshole. If Victor Zaborsky knows what happened to Robert after Robert was murdered and he's not saying it, Victor Zaborsky is a fucking asshole. Are the other two bigger assholes? Maybe. Probably. If they were the ones that actually did it. But Victor Zaborsky is still a fucking asshole. If that is the case. And on that is the case of Robert Wone.
That was fucking wild.
It's wild, and it just, again, seems so obvious. The main structure of what happened here seems so obvious. The details, though, we talk about them. They are perplexing little bullet points for us to speculate on. But for his family, for his friends, for his wife, for his loved ones, like, those are the fucking question marks that, like, keep you up at night.
Yeah.
And that's what is horrific, is if someone knows what fucking happened here and they're not saying it, they are a horrible person and or horrible people. Like, yeah, I don't know. I highly recommend everyone watches the documentary on Peacock, Who Killed Robert Wone, because they interview some of the paramedics, some of the investigators, but they also talk to a lot of Robert's friends and family. And it's just absolutely heartbreaking to hear them talk about this. Because again, I think it's fair to be intrigued, but we also should state that all of the things that make it intriguing are so painful to the family. And that's why I think this is an important case to discuss, is because justice hasn't been served here. And I just feel like, let's not forget what happened to Robert. Let's not forget what someone, or maybe some people, did to Robert. And I hope that this is a case that stays in the media and people continue to talk about it, because this is a highly covered case. There's Dateline episodes about it. There's huge, long, in-depth articles about it. And you can find, like, our sources on the website. There's so many podcast episodes about it. And I think it's good. I think people need, I hope it stays in the media until some fucking asshole finally decides to give these loved ones the tiniest amount of peace that they could possibly give by saying what happened here. And I don't have any good, sometimes I like to find a good inspiring message to leave you with, but I don't really know that I have one right now. So, oh, you know what? Yes, I do.
Uno reverse.
Uno reverse. Robert met Joseph Price in the 13 Club. The whole purpose of the 13 Club was to go around doing random acts of kindness. Robert was the type of guy who was putting coins in parking meters for strangers to save them from a parking ticket. So I think the message I'm going to leave everyone with is, let's all welcome to the 14 Club, first of all. This is the 14 Club, random acts of kindness. Let's all go do a random act of kindness today. And let's all aim to be a little bit more like Robert Wone. And let's let his legacy be more than what happened to him and more about who he was and having a positive impact on the world because he was such a fucking good person. And the world is worse off without him. Yep. Is that a good message?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Huzzah.
Huzzah. And with that, court is adjourned.
Bye.
Bye. Now, if you guys love the pod, make sure you're following us wherever you're listening so you don't miss out on any future episodes.
And while you're at it, we'd be forever in your debt if you had left us a 5-star rating.
For more content from us, you can follow us on Instagram and TikTok. Both are at A Trial by Podcast.
You can also follow us on our Facebook and join our Facebook group.
You can shop our merch by clicking the link in the show notes or visiting our website, atrialbypodcast.com.
A Trial by Podcast is a fully independent podcast. If you'd like to help support us, you can do so by donating through the link in our show notes.
The site we use for this is called Buy Me a Coffee, but don't worry, your donations will never be used for coffee or frivolous things, only for expenses related to running and growing the podcast. So thank you guys for your support.
Thank y'all. Huzzah.
Huzzah.